So, we just watched the one with Jermaine. Now we're on to another GOAT. Another GOAT. The man himself. K-Dot.
You are now tuned in to JB and the Fam official plug channel.
Had to change it up, I had to show them I was with it. I'm a youngin', not them changing, I'm just thankful that I did it. They done locked me in the cell and tried to hold me from the riches, yeah. Tried to hold me from the riches. See my time to go, see my time to fly. Yeah, they call me youngin', I just wonder why. Bitches wanna fuck and I just wonder why. See my time be coming.
The incredible story, Kendrick Lamar.
This video is brought to you by Nebula Classes, a brand new feature.
I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that.
Infamously poor and violent cities in the
All right.
state. Kendrick Lamar, Pulitzer Prize winner, Grammy Award
Oh
winner,
my
the
goodness.
Coltrane of hip hop. Millions of albums sold. We know who he
What's
is.
up,
He's
Perk?
the greatest rapper of our time. But how did he get there?
How did he
As
do
the
it?
story goes, it was 1984, and Kendrick Lamar's parents, Kenny Duckworth and Paul.
Okay, so he was born in 1984. And what did J. Cole say? 1985, I arrived. 30 years later, man, I'm grateful I survived. I wasn't supposed to get past 25. But joke's on you, motherfucker, we alive.
Paula Olivier find
So they are
themselves in
1
a
year
tough
apart.
situation. Kenny was running with the gangster disciples on the south side of Chicago.
1 year
Paula,
apart.
his girlfriend, was afraid he was going to end up dead or in jail. She gave him an ultimatum. They could leave Chicago and look for a better life, or their relationship was over. So they took a train to California, bringing only 2 garbage bags full of clothes and $500 in cash.
I like that.
It took a while for the couple to find a stable living situation. In the meantime, they worked fast food jobs, slept in their car, and sometimes stayed in motels or slept in the park if it was warm enough. It wasn't until 3 years of staying afloat in California that they had finally saved enough to get an apartment.
Damn, 3?
But once they did, their first son Kendrick was born soon after. Kendrick Lamar mostly describes his childhood in Compton as stable inside but chaotic outside. His parents placed a heavy emphasis on education and a safe home environment. And Kendrick has talked about how they always made sure there was food at
Hey,
home
what's
and
up with you,
Christmas present
girlie?
under the tree every
going
year.
on?
His mom says Kendrick was always quiet and observant to the point where the family started calling him Man as a reference to his maturity at such a young age. But Kendrick's childhood innocence didn't last long in a place like Compton. He talks about how his dad had a job at KFC, but he eventually realized that his work schedule wasn't adding up. Kendrick had figured out that his dad was secretly working in the streets to make ends meet for the family. His dad says, "I did what I had to do." While Kendrick tells positive stories of walking home from school with his mom, riding bikes, dancing in the living room while his parents listened to music with their friends, Compton was a dangerous place to be, and his parents couldn't protect him from
Titty bitty
everything. He
Tuesday,
tells the story
feeling
of
great,
seeing a young man shot
smelling
dead
great,
in front of
looking
his
great,
apartment
you
building
know.
when he was 5, and how he and his
Oh, my
dad
Lord, look at
accidentally
that.
got caught up in the
What's
riot
up,
when
Jacob,
he was
bro?
6, watching people loot stores and light buildings.
Hey,
on
I wanna
fire
see
in
your
the middle of
hair.
their car driving by. There are many stories about Kendrick's youth, with the one constant being that all he did was write. Even in middle school,
wanna
he
see
was
what it
writing
look like.
nonstop every day. His love of hip-hop ignited by the time he and his father saw Tupac and Dr. Dre filming a video outside of the Compton flea market. While Kendrick got good grades in high school, he was surrounded by what most people would consider a bad crowd. Like
Damn, so him and J. Cole got really good grades in school. Interesting.
Like I mentioned earlier, his life was stable inside but chaotic outside. While Kendrick never went to jail or joined a gang, he found himself towing the line of crime more than once. Whether it was getting shot at, or taking a friend who had been shot to the hospital, or driving around Compton with guns in his car, it got to a point where his parents kicked him out of their house for a while. Although Kendrick was smart, focused, and motivated, even someone as naturally gifted as him couldn't completely avoid the trouble he was surrounded by. The pressure to give up his potential and lose himself in the noise of Compton was ever-present. If it weren't for the people in Kendrick's
you be
life
going through
pushing him in the right
hairstyles like,
direction, anything could have happened to him.
breakfast, lunch, and
From
dinner
The
now,
Butterfly
huh?
Effect by Marcus J. Moore. By the time Kendrick got to high school, his career path was set. He was going to be a rapper, and nothing could make him veer off the course.
Just waiting
One
for
day
a
in
package to
particular, Matt
arrive.
Jeezy and
What you
Kendrick
got?
were walking home from
What you get?
Centennial High School when the budding MC just couldn't stop rapping. He started coming up with rhymes off the top of his head, and he didn't stop until 4 or 5 blocks later when he and Jeezy were close to their respective homes. It was about 20 minutes worth of rapping, Jeezy
gotta keep my
recalls.
hair done?
At that moment, his friend knew that Kendrick had what it
Shit,
took
I'm
to
glad-
be a
I'm
star.
glad you think
All
like
he
that.
needed
You gotta
to do
tell
was
some
stay
more
away
ladies
from the
to think like
pitfalls of
that, too.
street life. In the words of Jeezy, I was like, damn, Kendrick, if you just stay out of jail and stay alive, you're gonna make it. The words that literally came out of my mouth were, don't go to jail, you don't die. Sadly, prison and death beset many of their friends. Later in the book, Moore writes, at age 16, he started running with the wrong crowd, partying and drinking alcohol. It was really just kid shit, the same thing teenagers had been doing for generations. But given Kendrick's neighborhood and family history, his behavior foreshadowed a possible life of crime and gang affiliation. Kenny, his dad, wasn't having it. He'd come too far to watch his son fall victim to the same habits. Kendrick says, my father said, I don't want you to be like me. This conflict that Kendrick experienced as a young man, this moral...
But like, do parents really mean that though, y'all? Like, let's be honest, y'all. Do y'all think parents really mean that? So here's two things that they'll say. I want you to be better than me. Do y'all think they mean that? Yes or no? Like truthfully. Do y'all think they mean that? Yes or no? And then second, what he just said about his dad said, I don't want you to be like me. The first one, I'll say yes. But I don't want you to be like me. I'm gonna say, well, it might be different for women, maybe, but like for men, I'm gonna say no. They don't really mean that if they wouldn't say that. Because as a man, like I said, y'all, men are territorial. Women are possessive. So if I have a son, Deshaun, you have a son, you're not gonna want your son to look up to another man. That's so bass awkward. That's so fucked up. That makes no sense. That's like having a dog and you have dog food in your house, but that dog always finds a way to go through the doggy door and go to eat next door. Like, what? We got food right here. What the fuck? You see what I'm saying? So, the first one I can believe. The second one, it's iffy.
War between the
it's
violent
like
streets
situational
outside
almost.
and the talent and potential and goodness inside. This is the exact theme that Kendrick would channel into his musical storytelling as he became an adult and started to pursue a career as a rapper. This idea of the struggle to be a good person, the duality of man, and Compton as a living place, this is the story of Section 80 and Good Kid, Mad City. I think the funniest thing about Kendrick's early music, which a lot of people might not know, is actually the fact that he got signed in 2004, shortly after dropping his first ever mixtape at the age of 16.
I hear you.
This mixtape that got him signed at such a young age, titled Young Neighbor in Charge, is really not that good.
Young
The cover
Neighbor
art
in
is just a
Charge.
picture of Kendrick with an email address and phone number for the label that produced
This nigga
it,
funny.
holdies@yahoo.com, of course. The weird thing about this mixtape isn't actually the fact that Kendrick was a pretty good rapper even when he was still in high school, because look at him now, why wouldn't he be? The funny part to me is the way that he just calmly declares, what separates me from the other local young rappers? There is no separation because I'm not competing with them, I'm competing with their favorite rappers. And that prediction
shit.
actually came true.
Damn.
Like, anyone can say that, but
That's deep, huh? Damn. So he was saying, fuck these little kids, even though I'm a little kid too. Fuck these kids. I'm competing with these adults. The Dre's, the Pox. Damn.
But listening back
Like
to
that.
Kendrick predict his future into some tinny mic in Compton 18 years ago on top of an R&B beat, it's mind-blowing.
But guess what, y'all? That's why whatever y'all do, y'all have to keep going, bro. Because what if he stopped? What he said all them years ago, it wouldn't have held no weight now. It wouldn't have held no weight because he quit. He stopped. Oh, yeah, I could have. Yeah, you know how niggas be. Yeah, I could have. Shit, I used to rap when I was, man, I was better than everybody in my goddamn grade. I was better than everybody in the whole high school. And I was a freshman. But what you doing now, though?
Anyway, after some local success with his debut mixtape, Kendrick was signed as the first artist on Top Dog Entertainment by Anthony Tiffith, a record producer who had worked previously with rappers like The Game in the late 90s and early 2000s. And with his buzz steadily growing, Kendrick continued releasing mixtapes pretty much every year, opening for more established artists and working with label mates like J-Rock and Absol, but it wasn't until Kendrick got a massive co-sign from Lil Wayne back in 2009 that you could officially say he was on his way into the music industry.
Boss, we chillin'. What you
already know.
K-Dot.
The homie K-Dot, he crazy too.
Yeah. I co-signed the amp. Shout out to my homeboy J right to my little nigga right there. With the homie, I'm telling you. The homie, I co-signed it.
Just a year later, in the fall of 2010, Kendrick would release Overly Dedicated, the project that most people would consider his big break and his first ever appearance on the Billboard charts, when the project peaked at 46 on the Heat Seekers chart. Overly Dedicated is Kendrick's best and final mixtape, but if it were an album, it would probably be his worst. While Kendrick's rapping was pretty good, he hadn't yet developed the unique voices that make him the master of rapping he is today. And the mixtape's production and engineering, while pretty jazzy and dynamic, wasn't anywhere near the level his music would eventually reach. But I still really appreciate how he doesn't fall into the boring conscious rapper tactic of preaching about morality and simply rejecting the voices in around him, but instead, throughout Overly Dedicated,
because he's still talking about him being a Compton nigga and shit,
in a much more artistic, human way. And in this way, Overly Dedicated is pretty much a prototype of the cinematic storytelling Kendrick would achieve on later albums, just not quite as polished or interesting. However, it is definitely worth a listen, especially since the project is available on streaming services. Section 80 was Kendrick's next release, and in my mind, it's a lot like a more developed version of Overly Dedicated. I think it's funny that if you go back and read old reviews and comments about this record, a lot of people didn't like Kendrick's voice when it first dropped. People complained about his high pitch, which I think is funny because it's not something you'll ever hear
about the wrong. But what did he say though? What did he say though?
Interesting. The mixing
on the
cleaner,
track.
and of course, Kendrick's storytelling is on a whole other level. In my mind, Section 80 feels like a collection of campfire stories about Compton. It's not so much an analysis of social and political issues themselves, but a meditation on the way different vices and pitfalls can affect people in a much more personal way. You could connect all of these stories to political problems, but Kendrick is talking about it from less of a bird's eye view and more of a first-person perspective. Not as an aloof, disconnected commentator, but as someone who is surrounded by the people and issues he's talking about. Growing up in Compton and centering the story of the project around the different ways life in Compton can be dark and light at the same time, he has seen the darkest parts of society, and that's what gives him the wisdom to explore these complex issues in his music without it sounding forced or corny. Section 80 is full of moving themes. Kendrick talks about drug addiction, prostitution, gang culture, but none of these issues show up through a theoretical lens. It's all very real and raw and approached through a gritty, first-hand perspective. My favorite song is the dark, jazzy Kush and Corinthians, in which Kendrick explores the record's ultimate question. He asks God if he can still be a good Christian and be worthy of heaven despite his human nature, the same human nature that allows for the darkness and sin discussed throughout the record. Section 80 is maybe kind of a rough masterpiece. It's kind of raw, scattered, and unpolished, and Kendrick's later work approaches the same themes a little bit better, in my opinion. But I still think the way that Kendrick takes these struggles of his generation and demographic and speaks to them in an analytical way without it being corny, it's a very unique artistic ability, and even though it was his debut album, it put him miles ahead of his peers at the time and firmly on a track to start. If Section 80 was a manifesto about life in Compton, chronicling the atmosphere of the city and the spirit of the people living there, Good Kid, Mad City is an autobiography. Look at the album cover, a childhood photo of Kendrick with a baby bottle, a 40-ounce, and an uncle flashing a gang sign. In the words of Kendrick, that photo says so much about my life and about how I was raised in Compton and the things I've seen just through those innocent eyes. You don't see any other eyes, but you see my eyes are innocent, trying to figure out what's going on. And that is the story of the album itself. It's a story of growth on two levels. On one hand, it's full of tales from Kendrick's youth, painting a picture of how life in Compton shaped him and made him who he is during his teenage years, while at the same time connecting life experiences to more universal themes in a way that gives the record a timeless, literary quality, and in my opinion makes it one of the best albums of all time. The brilliancy of Good Kid, Mad City, in my opinion, is the fact that despite telling the story of an impoverished black kid growing up in Compton, a small city in Los Angeles County, there's a universality to Kendrick's storytelling that makes the album not just a story of his youth, but it speaks to youth as a whole, a process of maturation that we all go through before becoming adults.
So, and this is one thing that I heard people talk about. I've heard, real music connoisseurs, people who really, really, really love music. They say that, of course, Kendrick and J. Cole are so much different, but J. Cole raps in a way that's like to kids and helping them, mature and realize, the self-love and the morals and the ethics and, all that shit, right? And then Kendrick, on the other hand, raps about, that unapologetic hood, like real nigga street talk, but it still comes with some consciousness and some extreme deep thought, some deep intellectual thought behind it. But this album, what he's describing is literally what J. Cole only did in like the first couple albums in the beginning of his career. Not even KOD. Before that, Forest Hills Drive, you know, that whole album damn near. You know, telling about the, of course I had sex before, knowing I was fronting. I said, I'm like a pro, baby, knowing I was stunting. I mean, how many dudes around the world can relate to that? Like 98%. You know what I'm saying? So, they're just both geniuses. I mean,
as a whole,
shit.
In the process of maturation,
You don't gotta compare. You don't got to,
adults.
bro. You shouldn't
Throughout the
have
course
to.
of
They're
the
both
record,
great.
Kendrick illustrates
They're
this
both great.
process of growing up and maturing. In the beginning of the record, he's a distracted kid who takes a lot of risks and runs with the wrong crowd. He chases women, gets drunk, does drugs, and burglarizes homes with his friends. His character is on a path towards self-destruction, but the story of the record
And he was only doing that because they were doing it.
One of Kendrick's friends, Dave,
That wasn't
is
even
killed,
him.
and Kendrick comes to the abrupt and sobering realization that he must change his ways or face severe consequences.
Yup.
The next song in the record, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's 12 minutes long, but I can listen to it over and over without getting bored. Kendrick explores the ways in which his rough upbringing made him obsessed with death, how his constant exposure to violence, abuse, and drugs at a young age gave him a dark, cynical outlook on life. My favorite lines are in the third verse where he raps, cursing the life of 20 generations after her soul, exactly what had happened if I didn't continue rapping. He's comparing poverty to a curse, referencing the idea that a lack of education and financial stability can influence one's offspring for generations.
Nah, nigga, it is a curse, bro. And we deal with it every day. That shit is definitely a curse. And when people talk about, you know, being a chosen one, it's just a metaphor. It's just a metaphor to us as children being the one to break those generational curses. We are chosen. One might ask, who are we chosen by? Now that question is up for debate. But you choose yourself. Because we choose our family, we choose our friends. We choose to be the one to break the generational curses that were placed upon our family at birth. And that's what Kendrick has always... Because, bro, imagine living in Compton and you being so intelligent, so smart, but feeling like you have to be dumb. Because you feel like you have to be dumb and do dumb things based upon the people that you hang around. That must suck.
Creating a cycle of destitution. To me, that's what Good Kid, Mad City is all about.
Yeah.
That's what makes it one of the best albums I've ever heard. By examining the cycle of poverty he was born into, looking at himself and his actions with clarity, he can not only change his cycle, but inspire others to do the same as well. Towards the end of the 12-minute song, he raps, "What are we doing? Who are we fooling? Hell is hot, fire is proven, to burn for eternity, return of the student, that never learned how to live righteous, but how to shoot it," referencing the cycles of violence that perpetuate themselves in impoverished communities. At the end of the song, the outro depicts a neighbor, played by the legendary poet Maya Angelou, scolding Kendrick and his friends for carrying guns and looking for revenge against the men that killed their friend Dave. She tells them that they are dying of thirst and must be saved by God in order to avoid further destruction before leading them through a prayer. Good Kid, Mad City is one of my favorite stories of all time. Not just one of my favorite albums or one of my favorite records, but one of my favorite stories. Kendrick's ability to make something so personal to his life experience that applies to the lives of so many people and to have it be so engaging at the same time, there is nothing else like it. Even though it's a concept album with deep structured narrative themes, every song stands on its own. But together, for me, it stands as one of the best stories I've ever heard in my life. Personally, it's my favorite coming-of-age story of all time. And I don't think I'm alone in that opinion. Good Kid, Mad City was nominated for Album of the Year at the 2014 Grammys. It was named as one of the greatest
it's like one of those Tupac storylines.
And was eventually certified 3 times platinum. And at
It's
this point,
almost like
Kendrick's
Juice in the album.
he had reached
The
a
movie
point
Juice
where
in the
people were
album.
starting to consider him one of the greatest rappers alive after just 2 albums. But his
Interesting.
follow-up, To Pimp a Butterfly, couldn't have been
Ooh.
more different. While Good Kid, Mad City is
Yeah.
considered one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time, or one of the greatest hip-hop albums of the 2010s, or one of the greatest West Coast hip-hop albums, To Pimp a Butterfly is often considered one of the best albums ever made. This is not a day in the life of a curious young man in Compton. This is a story told through metaphors that allude to events and ideas in a cerebral, psychedelic way that requires deep analysis. If Good Kid, Mad City's story is a Tarantino movie, To Pimp a Butterfly is a James Joyce novel. To Pimp a Butterfly deals with the transformation of thoughts and beliefs that Kendrick experienced experience after finding success with his music and leaving Compton for the first time. While he might be on top of the world with his music and fame, he's encountered yet more problems and tells this story with a broader, more political and analytical tone. There are a few events that supposedly inspired the making of this record. From Kendrick visiting Nelson Mandela's jail cell in South Africa in 2014, to his outrage at the killings of unarmed black men that happened from 2013 to 2014 and led to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. He said it directly in interviews from this time period. He isn't speaking for the community, he is the community. Kendrick felt that he easily could have been Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown if he wasn't Kendrick Lamar, and he needed to channel that feeling into the album. He addresses violence, power, self-loathing, trauma, and politics in the way that all of those ideas connect to each other. At the same time, this album incorporates all of the different forms of black music in America. To Pimp a Butterfly incorporates the sounds of jazz, soul, and funk into modern hip-hop in a way that feels absolutely kaleidoscopic. And ultimately, To Pimp a Butterfly is hard to talk about, not because of the heavy themes and touchy topics, but because it's so deep. It's the same length as a feature film. It's full of obscure samples, references, and nuanced writing that you could literally write a book about. I mean, there are books about it in college classes too. He really explores some truly depressing.
And he didn't go to college. He didn't say, right?
The end result of all these thematic and musical ingredients is a psychedelic, dreamlike album that many people consider one of the best records ever made. The beautiful instrumentals were conjured up by some of the greatest instrumentalists alive today, and the deep writing is full of obscure references and both profoundly political observations and unfettered personal details. So just 3 albums in, and Kendrick has already made one of the best albums of all time. He's already revered as one of the sharpest, most talented cultural commentators in America, but I think the problem he was faced with now was that of accessibility. Yeah, To Pimp a Butterfly went platinum and debuted at #1 and was nominated for 7 Grammy Awards, but it wasn't all that accessible. And despite its meaning, there were scores of people who would never experience that meaning because they aren't going to invest the time it takes to dive into the album and appreciate it on its own terms. I mean, and I think that's the core purpose of Damn, Kendrick's 4th album, to continue exploring the themes of To Pimp a Butterfly in a way that has the potential to reach an even bigger audience than ever before. If Kendrick's goal with Damn was to make himself absolutely unavoidable, to get so big that his concepts and message would be heard by exponentially more people than ever before, he succeeded. Damn ended up one of the most commercial albums of the 2010s. It was the first ever non-jazz or classical work to win a Pulitzer Prize for music, and it was the best-selling album of 2017. Where To Pimp a Butterfly was full of anachronistic musical inspirations coming from the history of jazz and soul, Damn was more inspired by the sound of pop, trap, and contemporary R&B. And when it came out, it was far more polarizing than anything Kendrick had made before. To put it simply, many people thought Damn was basic. After the overwhelming density of sounds and ideas on To Pimp a Butterfly, there were a large number of critics and fans that felt as if Kendrick was selling out when he dropped Damn. But truthfully, and I've mentioned this before, I feel as if no matter what direction Kendrick goes in musically, he's never traded a more accessible sound for less meaningful ideas. One of the strongest ideas on Damn is faith and the way that Kendrick struggles with his religious beliefs as a result of the increasingly stressful conditions around him. Once again, I would say Damn comes from a perspective of speaking for his culture and his people, but he isn't an evangelical leader preaching prosperity to the masses. He's here to shed light on the dark thoughts and feelings that a lot of people have without promising that things are magically going to improve overnight if you just pray. In fact, one of the biggest ideas that appears throughout Damn is the idea that faith may not actually be sufficient to sustain us, that we're losing our moral compass while hanging on to religion and ultimately not fully interacting with either. In the words of Rodney Carmichael for NPR, the Old Testament is full of prophets trying their damnedest to save the world. More often than not, their first obstacle they overcome is self-doubt, self-loathing, even their personal aversion to self-sacrifice. Moses the deliverer was a murderer with a speech impediment. Noah the ark builder was a documented drunk. Elijah the resurrector was straight up suicidal. All of them were broken vessels, but vessels for their God nonetheless. Then there was Jeremiah. He suffered depression so badly, likely from carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, that students of the Bible refer to him as the weeping prophet. Later in the article, Rodney Carmichael says, "Our image of prophets today is warped by history. Consider the realities they lived and the messages they espoused in ancient times. They did not bring hope and redemption. They preached apocalyptic visions full of fire and brimstone, meant to turn people away from ungodliness. They did not come to praise or worship, but to destroy and rebuild. With a sense of duty that compelled them to speak truth to power, they faced frequent persecution, imprisonment, and even death. Prophets rarely won popularity contests, at least not without being beheaded for it later." So in my opinion, the themes of Damn really shine when you compare the record's chief concern with the wrath of God and the consequences of sin with the absolute lack of such themes anywhere else in music today. Kendrick addresses widespread political issues, his country's inner demons, so to speak, while at the same time addressing his own. His chief concerns are the eternal tug of wickedness and weakness on our souls. Kendrick depicts this conflict between wickedness and weakness in his own heart and connects that battle to the increasingly disconnected and polarized society where politics itself has become a battlefield. Damn was a pretty controversial album, but it was also by far Kendrick's most commercially successful record.
That's it. That's what he wanted.
$62 million and lasted over a year, with billions of views on music videos and even more billions of streams. To put it briefly, Damn was undeniably a massive success. And while a few people thought it was shallow or boring compared to the depth and detail of Kendrick's previous work, in my mind, it's just as brilliant as anything else he's ever made. It just sounds more accessible. Kendrick's storytelling just keeps getting better and better, no matter what sound he's going for. Making 3 of the most successful and beloved hip-hop albums ever back-to-back is a monumental achievement, but it also creates pressure. So while I don't think anyone expected Kendrick to disappear for 5 years, it isn't that much of a surprise to me that he would take time away from the public eye to plan his next move. But it also only makes sense that the last thing Kendrick did before his hiatus, after the billions of streams and Skrillex remixes, was the soundtrack album for a Marvel movie. And the Black Panther soundtrack, despite being one of the better movie albums I've heard and spawning a bunch of major hit songs, is still a movie album, and if you were to skip any Kendrick-affiliated project, this would be the one. But I do think Pray For Me with The Weeknd is a good example of just how great a writer Kendrick is. Even though it's a much more poppy song, Kendrick still finds a way to address the heavy topics he does in his own music. He says, I fight the world, I fight you, I fight myself. I fight God, just tell me how many burdens left. I fight pain and hurricanes, today I wept. Kendrick didn't announce his disappearance or anything. He just stopped making music unannounced. And over time, while Kendrick was gone from the public eye, the social issues he talked about on his albums only became more and more apparent to the general public. Kendrick's music had become so topical and relevant that he was basically being hailed as a larger-than-life figure, a prophet, a poet, even a philosopher. I remember in the summer of 2020 when people were marching in the street against police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Kendrick's music was being played off Bluetooth speakers in the streets every single day, and there was this expectation that after everything he had said in his music, after all of his political statements and ideological concepts, he would come back and say something to make sense of the violence and panic, but he didn't.
I wonder how artists feel whenever anybody, word for word, recites their songs. I want to ask somebody, what feeling do they get in that moment? And they see the look on somebody's face rapping or singing or humming their shit, you know? It's interesting.
Didn't. The only thing I remember seeing was some unconfirmed photos of Kendrick in a mask at a protest in Comeup.
That's
Kendrick. He didn't say anything himself, even though he was basically the unofficial muse of the Black Lives Matter movement. So 5 years go by since Kendrick's last album, and people started to get pretty impatient. We knew he wasn't gone forever. He had made an understated announcement of a new venture back in 2020 called PG Lang, a multilingual artist-friendly service company focusing on music, film, television, books, and podcasts. And a year later, in the summer of 2021, he announced that his next album would be his last with TDE, the label he had been signed to since he was 16 years old. But he didn't actually say when that album would be coming. He wrote a quick note to his audience saying, "Thank you for keeping me in your thoughts. I prayed for you all, and I'll see you soon enough." After that note, there was nothing about an album, even though he hopped on his cousin Baby Keem's album for a few verses, including the extremely popular Family Ties, where he pulled off one of my favorite verses in all of 2021. Fast forward to 2022, and once again, people are asking, where the hell is Kendrick Lamar? And there would be no answer until a third of the way through the year, when he lit Twitter on fire by replying to a tweet jokingly saying Kendrick Lamar has officially retired, with a link to a note that said, "For immediate release, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, 5/13/22. Appreciate your patience." It was a frenzy. The most anticipated album of the last 5 years, and appreciate your patience. It was Mr. Morale.
I didn't even notice this shit got almost 600,000 likes.
Big Steppers, 5/13/22.
Trolling.
Appreciate your patience. It was a frenzy. The most anticipated album of the last 5 years. An album that some people thought was never coming out. Finally, it was right around the corner. But at this point, the only thought in my mind was, you know what? Some people are going to hate it. No matter what it sounds like or how good it is, some people just won't like it. Unfortunately, I ended up being right. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was not a flop, but it wasn't what people expected. I mean, in my mind, this album is a masterpiece.
It
plays out like a
is.
therapy session where Kendrick explores the most vulnerable topics and stories he's ever touched on with his music. He talks about his family, his kids and wife, his mother, father, and his
bro.
aunts. He talks
What's
about
wrong
his
with
role
y'all,
as a protector and the people that protected him when he was younger. He talks about salvation and the journey towards forgiveness and the acceptance of trauma, and he even opens up about some of the trauma he went through as a younger person. He talks about his own duality, reckoning with his capability to be both good and evil at the same time. The main theme of the album isn't a new one for Kendrick. He talks about the generational curse and the way the actions of our ancestors can follow us through our own lives and create a perpetual cycle of suffering. Just because something doesn't have as much pop appeal doesn't mean it isn't meaningful. In fact, I think Mr. Morale is his deepest album yet. Over the course of the record, Kendrick seeks to free himself from the mental prisons and burdens put in place by the trauma he's experienced. And by the end, after some truly dark songs and ethereal production, he reaches a beautiful conclusion. He says, "I choose me, I'm sorry," referring to the idea that he can no longer be a cultural savior without first addressing his own family problems and inner struggles. Mr. Morale is a singularly beautiful, deeply self-aware.
And that's why I don't like fandom. I don't like fans. I don't like fans because fans want what they want. They might think that they are in it for the artist or for the streamer, creator, whatever, artist, anything. But they just want what they want. That album was so fucking great. People are not even gonna know it's great until 2030. This album was so fucking great. It's not what they expected. What did you expect, dummies? It to be something like Damn, where I'm not really going like this is what I begin to know about people. How you communicate certain things. This is what people like, and this is what people get programmed into thinking. People get programmed into thinking you need to go wide, not deep. So I'm gonna give you an instance. What's up, Sin? Sin, I'm gonna give you an instance, bro. You ready? Sin, how you doing? Sin, what's your favorite color? Oh yeah, mine too. Yeah, mine's blue. What's your favorite sport? What you like to eat for breakfast? What's your favorite breakfast foods? What's your favorite snack? Favorite drink? What's your favorite video game of all time? Do you like Xbox or PlayStation? That's going wide. You see what I'm saying? That's going wide, but going deep. Yo, Sin, what did you think about Kendrick's album? And I'll say, I really felt the genuine connection between the song with his dad because I resonated with it. I felt the connection between him and his dad with his aunties and his family and his psychological trauma that he was going through by himself, not talking to nobody. Like, that's going deep. But people like this, fans like this, they don't like this so much until it's too late. Or years after. You see what I'm saying? That's what I begin to learn. So how you communicate different things to different people, that's what we have to learn now. To a woman, you have to learn, as a man, you have to learn how to communicate something totally different, but you still have to get your message across. You cannot tell a woman, no, you don't look good. To your homeboy, you can, bro. Take that shit off. Nah, bro, we going to the club, nigga, not the strip club. We going to the club, nigga. Take that off. You can say that to your homeboy, but not your lady, not a woman. Oh my, he's just so disrespectful. But I just said the same thing that I would say to anybody. How are disrespectful all of a sudden? You see? So communication skills are really important. But also on the other balance beam side, you have to realize you can't give a fuck. Because sometimes just what people need, they might not think this is what they need because nobody's ever done it. But you need to be like, no. Tell a chick no. She gonna start to like you a lot more. Tell her no. I don't know. She gonna be like, he told me no. Shit, why he told me no? He got a girlfriend? He this, he that? But see, you in their mind though. You're in their mind more than if you would have said, oh yeah, girl, trust me. Yeah, I like you. Yeah, you're nice. Yeah, you look cute, pretty, you all that. Sometimes that's what's needed.
Album with some of the best songs.
But people don't know until.
In my opinion, it's a top album from Kendrick. Kendrick Lamar is a true artist, an artist who says true things. Maybe that sounds simple, but we live in a world where truth is far from encouraged in the art economy. You can fake your backstory, you can fake your culture, and fake your personality, and you can be perfectly successful with that made-up persona.
You can. You really can. And that's pathetic.
In order to get where Kendrick is today and make the music he's made, it takes a level of self-awareness and introspection that most people never reach.
Oh, man.
And at the same time, he creates...
Because that takes a lot of time. People's time goes into work, Christmas, Thanksgiving, vacation, summertime, off time, having babies, going to funerals. That's what their time goes to, not introspection, intuition, self-awareness. Don't go into that.
Deep worlds full of concepts and characters, and it makes every single one of his albums a masterpiece in its own unique way. Whether it's the gritty darkness and character-based storytelling of Section 80, or the cinematic narrative of a teenager navigating the dangers and temptations of life in Compton in Good Kid, Mad City, or the unprecedented musical depth and poetic format of To Pimp a Butterfly, or the massive commercial impact and themes of personal struggle on Damn, or the emotionally devastating depth of Mr. Morale, Kendrick has created a world of music just as imaginative, just as meaningful and timeless as any other great work of storytelling.
Yeah.
To me, he's one of the greatest artists of all time, let alone in music. And his dedication
I wonder what this dude's top 3 or top
Kendrick
5
Lamar's
is.
greatest strength is not just how he can show us his truth, but how his truth applies to everyone who hears it. No one else comes close. This has been Volksgeist. Thank you for watching.
W video.
Speaking of quality and dedication to your craft.
Yep, don't want to hear that right there. Yep, that's the outro, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to the boy, man. Hold on, let me give you a like. Let me give you a like. Cause yeah, that's a whole lot of energy and time put into this. Solid video, man. Solid. Good shit, buddy.